I've got my gap to close on that round, and you see instead of star points I have little rectangles. So I am going to close that round by making a small Teneriffe knot around this traveling stitch right here and another strand, if I can grab another one. So I may have to pull this in closer so I can see, and you may not be able to. Oops, see, my thread is really getting knotted up and fuzzy now, and my tail needs to be pulled through, so I may need to start this one over if I've got a tangle going on. There we go. Try to pull that tail through. And my thread is getting short and fuzzy and twisty, so I don't think I have enough thread to make it for the next 2 rounds. So I think I'd mentioned this before, that when you get to a new round, you need to look at your thread and see if you've got enough, because it's always easier to tie off at the beginning or end of a round. So I'm going to make an extra little knot here just to cut this thread off and just make sure it's nice and secure, and this will not show on the right side, hopefully. So what I do is I cut it about 1/4 of an inch. If I can find my scissors, they're never handy when I need them. And I leave it because I want to put fray check there. And at the very end, I'll come through and I'll clean up all of these threads and cut them a lot shorter, because sometimes the fuzzies will lean over and you can see them from the other side. But I do want to put fray check on there, and I can do it now because I have my bottle handy, or any kind of fabric glue, or any kind of product that you like to use. So I'm going to stop the video now and get my needle threaded with a new length of thread, and we'll start the next round. We're going to skip over and do the edging next. Usually you do it last, but it's going to be more convenient to take care of the interlacement round if we do the scallop round now. But this is the one I like, and this is probably the only one I've ever done. So what we want to do is secure these, because the only thing that's holding these 2 strands, they loop around this securing stitch here. So if I cut my holding threads off, this is just going to be a loose loop. So I'm going to take one leg from one of these securing things, or joining places, I don't know what to call them, and the opposite leg on the next hole, and I'm going to join those together. So I'm not traveling or anything because I've just started a new strand of thread. So since I'm starting a new strand of thread, I can start anywhere on the loom because we're just going in a circle. So I'm already here, so I'm just going to take these 2 opposite threads, and they are going to come together and form that little double bar looking thing in the middle. You'll see it when I tie it. So right now I'm not tied to anything. I just want to get my needle in there, and then I'm just going to tie this in a square knot just to hold that. And I'm going to tie it as close to the end of the scallop as I can. I'm pulling it toward the outside. It usually drifts back, but I try to get them as close as I can. But again, that's a design decision for you to make where you want that to be. But I like the edges tidy. So again, I can put fray check on that knot right there and trim that to about 1/4 inch for now. We're going to clean this up later. And then now I can start my sequence. So all of these are going to look like this. You're going to have these 2 little angled diamond shaped things, triangles, and then you're going to have 2 bars together in the middle. So I'm going to take the next free leg that I did not use in the last knot, and that's going to be this angled one plus the right leg of the next hole, and sometimes you need to go in there and open that up a little bit. I do use the groove in my loom if it's available to stick my needle down in there to get underneath. It helps. I might add some more grooves along the edge there in my next design. So I've got those 2 ready to bind together. I need to wrap up and over my needle to make my knot. Pull everything up snug, and that little fuzzy is probably going to get caught in there, so I'm going to maneuver that and pull that tight so you can see the design coming into view. So I feel like I've split that thread. This is really tight at this point because we've got a lot of stitching going on here that is pulling on these warp threads. I call them warp threads, or these ends. So just be conscious of that. So when we make these knots, we want them to land, you know, so that they're kind of pointing toward the center. And just keep going around. The next available leg is right here. I'm going to grab the next one on the next hole and just continue on around. So if yours doesn't look like this at this point, with these little V's going on and the double bars in the middle, then you're grabbing the wrong pair. So I will finish the scalloped edge and I'll meet you back on the other side. I'm coming up to the last couple joins here, and I do like to hold my loom up. I can do it a lot faster this way. And you see I'm just kind of scratching those knots into position, and they want to land near that groove, so that worked out pretty good in the placement line. But put them, just make them land where they want to rest permanently, because once you take this off the loom, it's going to relax and they're going to slip anyway. So we can block it after we finish so that they pretty much stay where you want them to go. And this should be the last one. So and you see my little gap right there? Don't miss that gap, because I've got to have a little bar going across there so you don't make the same mistake I did. So I'm going to make a small Teneriffe knot. What I need to do is just cross over and grab a thread, and I think I'm going to make it on the bottom so that it doesn't, that'll stop it from sliding. I can do 2 knots, it doesn't matter. I might do 2 just to finish this off. Oops, I didn't wrap my needle. I need to get organized here. So any knot will do, because all we're doing is closing the gap. Making a little bar across there. So that gap is closed up, and now I'm going to do the round of interlacement is what they call it. My fray check has dried on that previous knot where I tied in a new thread, and that little fuzzy is going to drive me crazy, so I'm going to be careful and trim it a little bit closer, but don't cut the knot because you will cry. It's a little bit better. Get all those fuzzies off, but there's another one. All right, so we're going to do the interlacement stitch. So the way that works, let's see if I can show you an example. This, I don't know if you can tell, these double strands or these double pairs have been flipped over each other. On this one I did 2 over 2, but I found it a little difficult. So to learn this stitch, I suggest that we do 1 twisted over 1. So I can choose any starting point that I want. You're going to have a little short traveling stitch, and sometimes if you didn't run out of thread like I did, you're going to have a bundle of traveling stitches from a previous row. I would suggest to sew over and travel over to a clean or a one that's really easy to see, because the first twist can kind of disappear on you, and when you come back around it's hard to figure out where to join. But it's not a big deal. Once the lace is off the loom, you're not going to be able to see those areas very well anyway. Someone would have to know they're there to see them. So to make the twist, I like to turn my loom this way, and I'm just going to pick a starting point. And I think that since my last knot is here and my thread tends to want to hide right here, I think this is a good place. So I'm just going to hold this up in my hand, and I'm going to poke my needle down and scoop up this bar and pull it over the one behind it and twist them together. Hopefully you can see that. I just flipped. I'm making them go and making my needle go through opposite what it really wants to do. So normally you would be going under and over in order around, but I'm going to flip that one, and I can use the groove in my loom to help me. So I'm it pops out of your needle, so you're going to want to dig in and come back up without grabbing anything else. That's the hardest part, is not grabbing something else. So you'll be able to see it better as I go along here. So I've got a lot of thread here, probably more than I need. And then since I traveled right here, this may not land where I want it, and it's flipped back into its old position. So that first one is not going to behave like you want it to. So when we come back around, we're going to try to make that flip stay where we want it to. And sometimes it's just hard to hide on the end. But you see, it's flipped, this one's flipped back to where it came from. So when I come back around, I'm going to try to put it back into position. But you don't want to pull this traveling stitch too tight at this point. So the first one is kind of tricky. So I pull my thread back so I can see where I'm going to twist next. So it's these next 2 that are available. So I'm going to go to the top one, lift it up, flip over the bottom one, and twist them together, and run my needle straight through. So you can see the double over double would be a little bit more difficult. So you probably need a little bit more room in here if you're going to do 2 over 2, because it gets really tight. So now you can kind of see that twist going on. I'm going to pull my thread back, reach under the next 2, the second one, and pull it over the back one, twist my needle around, and try to come back up over without grabbing anything else. This is probably a little more difficult than the last 2 stitches, but it makes such a pretty effect that I think it's worth doing. So if you're struggling with this and you just don't like it and it's giving you a headache, just do some knots along this row here to fill up. But I think it's worth learning this one. This one feels really tight, but I'm digging my needle down into that groove and then pushing those stitches down so I can pull my needle out. And I'll do one more. and I'm pushing them where I want them to go. I'm trying to follow that groove, but they may not want to stay there. Pull my thread out of the way, grab the top thread, pull it over the bottom thread, dig in, twist, and come back out. And don't make any knots on your way out. Would be ideal. So my tail needs to be shortened. Alright, so I'm going to continue twisting until we get back to the other side, and I'm going to show you, you're going to have to play this by ear when you get ready to join at the end. So we'll meet back up there. Alright, I'm getting close to the end, and I just want to point out that where I started was one of these in-between ones like that. So it's kind of jumbled right now, so you can't really tell. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up these last couple. So when you start your round, try to pay attention to which bars that you grabbed, because sometimes you can't tell. I can't anyway. So these are the last two. And I got a nice little twist going around. Alright, so I've got to decide how I'm going to make that twist back the way I wanted it to. So I'm going to try to grab that and retwist it back, force it to go over the top of the other one. Sometimes mine have not looked like that at the end, and I just had to make a decision where to put my needle. So that looks pretty good. This one is not quite as neat as the rest of them, but again, it's not going to show in the overall lace. So I've finished the round. It looks like all my bars are connected. So all I have to do now is tie a little knot to finish this thing off. So you can watch me do this, or you can fast forward. And I'm going to tie a second one because this is the very end of the project. And I want to make sure it stays. Gonna trim it, put some fray check on. I hope I was in the camera enough. I looked up and saw that I had drifted away. So hopefully you know what I did, because I'd have to start the project over to get you back to this point. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is take this off of the loom. Turn your loom over, release any tape that you've got going on back there. And I usually take a sharp seam ripper, and you don't want to do this on this side because you really run the risk of cutting something you don't want to cut. So do it all on the back side. So we're going to just start running scissors or seam ripper or whatever you have. Don't be too aggressive with it, because if I accidentally split any of these holding stitches, it's going to grab onto my lace and start pulling it out of shape, because these knots do slip. So don't be too aggressive. If it doesn't feel like it wants to cut easily, just be gentle with it so that you're not disturbing your lace on the other side. Because I think I showed you in one of the previous sections that I did split the yarn, and I usually split one or two. So now that is free right there, so we can slowly start lifting our lace off. And if it doesn't want to come, don't force it, because I can see some that are still kind of hanging on. So we're going to gently pull on these and make sure they're not split. That one was kind of, but it came away freely. So if I did split one of these joining stitches, I'll usually stick my needle in there and tear away at the junk yarn here until I see, like that one's stuck. I don't want to just try to yank it off. So I'm going to stick my needle in there and just kind of rip it apart and then pull it away. So it doesn't, if I keep pulling at it, I'm just going to distort my lace. So this is the wrong side. You can see our little fuzzies there. I need a dark background here so you can see this. You turn it over to the right side and you can barely see any of the places that we joined. So I'm going to thread up a shorter needle, if I can find a needle threader. They're never handy when I need them. I should get more organized when I make videos, but I don't. Alright, and then I'm just going to pass this thread under this bundle to the other side without piercing anything. See how nice that looks? And then I'm just going to secure this with a little knot. This one really is not going anywhere because you've got so much stitching and weaving and all that holding it in place, but you can tie a tiny knot to secure that, and then trim it and put your fray check if you want to. And we are finished with our little medallion. And then, as I mentioned before, I will sometimes go in there and finish off these little fuzzies just so that they don't peek out from the other side, but that I think is really pretty. I'm going to make a separate video to show how to lace for the smaller medallion. This one was the 2.5. This is the 2-inch. So it's a little bit different, but it's not hard.